Good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone here this morning. And I thought maybe just to begin, I'm going to start with just a very, very simple, very quick survey. Just raise of hand if you grew up and you were sort of the lone child in your house. Are there any sort of lone, no sibling kids? Everybody here had siblings. Wow, we had a few at the first service. Wow. Okay, so just for fun, if you grew up with siblings, raise your hand. So that's pretty much everybody. So then that's good because then everybody this morning will know what we're talking about because we're going to talk about sibling rivalries. And I'm sure if you have grown up with a home with siblings, whether it's brothers, sisters, brothers, whatever it is, then at some level there has been some rivalry. Sometimes it's good, just good, in jest competition, and sometimes, going back to the very first siblings like Cain and Abel, it could be really a deadly situation. So there's lots of different things. So I want to just talk a little bit about sibling rivalries. We'll look at one of the most famous sibling rivalries, at least in the Bible. But here are a couple other famous sibling rivalries from history. There's, the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus. For Greek mythology, you all know about Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Hades is still like burning with envy about his situation with his brothers. It's terrible. I know it bombed in the first service too. I just thought I would. You think of the daughters of King Henry VIII, Queen Mary I, and Queen Elizabeth I, maybe more modern times. There's Venus and Serena. There's Peyton and Eli. And probably the most kind of notorious, kind of infamous tabloid sibling rivalry right now is Will and Harry, right? So you've got the heir and you got the spare. So these... Hey, those are Harry's words. Those aren't mine. Those are Harry's words. But again, so we all know about sibling rivalries, and today we are looking at the epic sibling rivalry of Jacob and Esau. And before we look at these two brothers and their kind of rocky relationship, what I'll first do is I want to give a quick recap, kind of where we're going through, where we've been in this series. Then also, before we jump in, I'm going to give you a warning, not just for what's going to be talking about this morning, but in some of the coming weeks. But first of all, let's just do a quick recap. So we're doing this series. It's called Founding Fathers. It's some of the early chapters of Genesis in the Bible, where we're looking at really the three, what are often referred to as the three great patriarchs of the Jewish faith, of the Bible, of the Israelite people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then also sort of their family, their descendants, and the people that go along with them. One of the things they've also said is when you hear these stories, not just to hear them, just like these, quaint little Sunday school stories that we learned as a kid, but really they are establishing the kind of the foundation for the rest of Scripture. Pretty much every other Bible story, Sunday school lesson we get is some way rooted back to the events surrounding these three gentlemen. And I'm going to just say that their lives cast a great shadow, not just across the pages of Scripture, but literally across the pages of history, even to this day. One of the things that I've said is we've been going through these to consider three themes that occur over and over again as part of their stories. The first is the idea of geography. I always like to say this. I remember a teacher telling me, remember this, Genesis equals geography, and that's very helpful. But it's not just geography, it's geopolitics, right? We're again 4,000 years later, after the times when these gentlemen walked the earth, we're still squabbling and we're still seeing that same bits of land contested and argued about today. It's still a very, very relevant thing. It's also not just, the other next theme is this theme of family. And again, not just family and this is a nice little family and have a little family reunion, but it's more than that, these families that involve into nations. And it's not just where the nation of Israel comes from, but actually Genesis also maps out where a lot of the surrounding nations come. Again, it has that sort of geopolitical nation-building vibe. And then lastly is this whole area of worship or religion, where birthed in this family is this unique monotheistic religion to this one true, all-powerful, all-loving God who's over and above all other gods or ideas of gods. And it all goes back right to these opening words that God initiated to Abraham. We don't know why he chose Abraham out of all the people, but God initiates this incredible promise that begins with these words in Genesis chapter 12. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. Right? In some way, some shape or form, all the blessings, all the promises of Scripture that come after that are somehow still rooted in that initial promise God made to Abraham. Just again, where we've come, we meet Abraham and Sarah. They're already older in life. They live kind of in a far foreign land, this place called Ur of the Chaldeans. And God just says, I've chosen you, and I want you to get up, leave your family, and I want you to go to this strange land, this land of Canaan. And shockingly, Abraham and Sarah do that. They've got lots of adventures, lots of misadventures, and everything that they do is rooted in this promise that God has for them, but there's one major ingredient that's missing. Through it all is God is saying, I'm going to make your descendants great. I'm going to make you into a great nation, but Abraham has one problem. He goes, I've got lots of spares, I just don't have any heir, right? So again, it's not until Abraham turns 100 years old, Sarah turns 90, that he finally has the long-expected heir in Isaac. Now, last week we had a guest speaker. We had Mike Kleinhaus come. Over at our Fenland church, they looked at a passage of Scripture that we're going to skip over this week, and that's that incredible passage or story when finally, after all those long-awaited years, Abraham finally has his son Isaac, and what does God do? God tells Isaac to do the unthinkable. I want you to sacrifice your son Isaac. And Abraham prepares to do that, and then in the last minute, God provides a substitute. Now again, we're not going to cover that story, but if you want to go, Pastor Matt's message will be available online. If it's not already up, it'll be up there in the next couple days or so. We're going to pick things up, and we're going to kind of jump past a lot of Isaac. Really the main emphasis is sort of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Abraham and Jacob are really the two kind of bookends. There's a lot more in relationship to Abraham, and we're going to pick things up today where Isaac has already been married. He's married Rebekah, but they're longing for a son of their own to again, have these ancestors to be able to pass along this legacy, this inheritance, this blessing. But before we look at these two sons of Isaac and Rebekah, I want to give you a warning. Now, the warning is this. In this story and in some of the stories that are come, there is a lot of favoritism, a lot of family favoritism. Now, a lot of people, when they hear these stories, one of the things that people react to is it's very clear that these parents have certain children who are favorites. So in this story, clearly Isaac and Rebekah have their favorites. You'll see that. If you think it's bad this week, wait till you get next week, and Jacob clearly has favorites with his kids. Now, the reason why we're kind of offended, like say, for example, they're not here so I can pick on them in this service. I have 3 daughters, Elizabeth, Kendra, and Jenna. And what if I was to come up to you and say, okay, I want you to introduce the congregation to my 3 daughters, lovely daughters. And I'm just going to tell you which one's my favorite, which one's my least favorite. So first of all, Kendra, she's my favorite. Jenna, have here. Elizabeth, I don't really like her much. That's why we sent her off to school, just to get rid of her. You'd probably be pretty offended, right? We don't like this idea of choosing favorites. It kind of sits yucky. So a lot of times we hear these stories and go, like, what kind of parents are these? But it's actually even a little bit worse than that. The tension's even beyond that. I'm looking at Scott and Jacqueline. Obviously, you have 9 kids. You got to have favorites, right? Do you want to just let the rest of us know? She's the only one in the room right now, right? Yeah. And is giving you a grandchild. But it's beyond just parents choosing family favorites. Clearly, in these passages, it comes across as though God has favorites, right? God clearly chooses Jacob over Esau. And in fact, this isn't in Genesis, but Paul in Romans 9 And he's paraphrasing the book of Malachi. He says these words, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Right? Like, those are strong words. How do you get it? It's like, oh, wow, nice guy. Now, I think there's more going on there, but I want to just at least bring up that tension. How do you deal with this issue of favoritism? Let's see if there's some clues. So let's jump into the story. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to move. I'm going to kind of condense a fair bit for us today. And again, I don't like using just sort of normal boring titles, so I try to come up with little clever titles. We're going to pick up in chapter 25 of Genesis, verses 19. And this is the arrival of Jacob and Esau, and I'm just going to call it a dueling duo is delivered. And let me begin this way. This is the account of Abraham's son, Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. So right at the get-go, again, there's this same thing. There's this long period of time where there's barrenness, where there is no child. They pray out for the child. Finally, Rebekah is able to conceive, and the first thing we know is these boys, it's going to be a rocky relationship. We get that right even in the womb. Before they even arrived, there is a rocky relationship. Verse 23, then the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. One of the themes that I mentioned earlier as you go through these books is this idea, again, not just of family, but this nation building. And I'm just going to bring this out. This is just to help you kind of get an idea. The book of Genesis is not just about, where did the Israelites come from? So already we've been introduced to a number of people. So a couple weeks ago we looked at Lot. Lot has 2 descendants. He has 2 sons, and they become the fathers of the tribes or the nations of Ammon and Moab. Won't tell you how he had those sons because that's kind of terrible. But again, you have that. Today we're going to meet about Esau, and he becomes the father of this kind of neighboring nation and rival Edom. And then also we kind of didn't cover Ishmael, but Ishmael, we learned that his sons are going to be responsible to these 12 nations or tribes of sort of the Arabian Peninsula. So again, you're seeing how this is not just telling the story of Abraham's family, but also sort of these extended families that are in some way connected to Abraham. We continue on, verse 24. When the time had come for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first came out was red, and his whole body was hairy, was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. And Esau just means hairy, so we can call him Harold if you want. After this, his other brother came out, and with his hand grasping Esau's heel, he was named Jacob. And Jacob actually literally means heel or grasper. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Right? Already from the beginning, it's like, what could possibly go wrong? Right? No favoritism here, right? They're very, very clear on this favoritism, but right at the beginning, first of all, before they were born, they're saying, okay, they're jostling, they're battling each other, and then we're told that these 2 boys are going to turn into nations, and that the older is going to serve the younger. We've got those pictures, and then when they finally arrive, we learn that there's different makeup of how they look. The one person is grasping and clinging at the other one. And then to top it off, we also have mom and dad have their favorites, right? We have also Esau, who's kind of like a man's man. He's kind of the hunter, the field. He's kind of the rough, rugged kind of guy. And then you got like Jacob, who's the soft, sweet mama's boy who stays at home, right? Kind of the home, right? So you have all these different tensions. And I just love this, even from a completely literary perspective. Like, this is one of the best introductions in a story ever. Right? It just foreshadows what's to come. And not even just what's going to come with these boys, but literally what's going to happen and how these nations are going to wrestle in the days ahead. So that's how it starts. The next thing is the boys grow up a little bit, and you kind of get an idea of their relationship. And this little scene is one of those scenes when I was a kid and I'd hear this story in Sunday school. I'm like, why did they even include that in the Bible? That is so petty. It is so minor. This is just kind of like sounded like every day in my home with my brothers, something that we would do. But it's recorded, and this is really sort of the main scene that marks of why Jacob and Esau are so different. I'm going to call it snubbing status for stew. And it starts at chapter 25, verses 29 to 34. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is also why he was also called Edom. So that's where the Edomites come. Edom just means red. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So they pinky swore. And so he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then he got up and left. And then these are these fateful, very important words. So Esau despised his birthright. Now again, this just sounds like a simple, trivial, sibling squabble. But in this relates pretty giant implications. What's the difference between Esau and his brother Jacob? So because of birth order, technically speaking, Esau was going to be the one who's going to take on the family name. He was going to be the next main patriarch. He is going to take the lion's share of the inheritance. He was going to be the one who was going to pass along really not just the inheritance, but most importantly, that blessing that was first given to Abraham, then to Isaac. Now it's supposed to come to Isaac. He is the one who bears the responsibility of that family estate, the family name. But here's also where we see the big difference between Esau and Jacob, right? By birthright, Jacob has no access to that. But Jacob sees, you know what? That's a big deal. I don't want my birth order, just because I came second, was born by a few minutes a little bit later, I don't want to lose that Abrahamic blessing on my life. I want it to be my descendants that carry the great name. And I will do whatever I can to have it for myself. Right? That's sort of the idea that Jacob came across. Esau's like, really? I don't really care about that. Right now I'm just hungry. Give me some food. That's the difference. And you think if I'm kind of being hyperbolic, the writer of Hebrews, a little bit later in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 16, he says this, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance right as the oldest son." Right? So later back he says, you know what the issue with Esau was? And he's the depiction of what it means to be godless. Somebody who could care less about future things because they're too focused on the temporal. That's the problem with Esau. It's kind of interesting when I think of this. I think of sort of there's like a bit, and this is a wonderful discussion to have in life. If you're part of a life group to drive your life group leaders insane. I call it like a chicken and egg conundrum. Because there's a couple things that we've got, right? We're already from the beginning, we're told that at least Rebecca knows that the younger is going to serve the older. So that we already kind of know that Jacob's going to get the better blessing. So the question was, did God foreordain and orchestrate these events to kind of manipulate so that Jacob would get the inheritance? Or did God already know the character of these two boys and knew who was going to do it? So again, I'm not going to give you the answer to that because I don't know the answer, but you can discuss that with your small groups because it's kind of fun. But anyway, I don't want to belabor this too much, but I want to go back to that area of favoritism, even just that line where it says, "Jacob have I loved, but Esau I hated." I think that this is not necessarily that God necessarily hated Esau as a person and just loved him, just an arbitrary. But I think this is more closer to the reality, is we can love our kids equally an amount, right? And it's kind of hard to say show favoritism like that. But it is very honest and very true that our kids are going to make different choices. Certain choices that they make we're going to love, we're going to appreciate, and there's certain choices that they're going to make that we're not going to love, we're not going to appreciate, we're actually going to hate. And I think when God is talking about love and hate, he's talking about the choices and what was priorities to these two boys. One thing, he hated the priorities of Esau and the character of Esau, but he loved the priorities and the character, or at least some of the character, of Jacob. I also just want to kind of mention this. I'm going to, pick on my kids again for just a moment. And I don't want to belabor but I do think this is a pretty important point. See, I have 3 girls, and I don't expect to have any more kids. If I do, I would be the most surprised of anyone. Same with Sarah. But the funny thing is, because I have 3 girls, I have been asked many, many times over the years, "Oh, don't you wish you had a boy? Did you ever wish do you ever wish you had a son?" And here's the honest, truthful answer to that question: absolutely not. Right? That's my gut answer. I would never change a thing. I love my family. I love my girls. And in fact, I remember even kind of when they were younger, and I would be pulling my hair out because of the girls, and all of a sudden we would have lots of friends who had young boys, and they would come over to visit, or they'd be together, and I'd realize how wild and crazy they are. And after those boys left, I'd be hug my kids. I'm I'm so glad that I have girls. You guys are so calm and cool. I'd much rather have the angels than those little demon boys. Anyway, that's just saying it. I'm just being truthful. But if there is one inkling, right? If there is one thing in me, and I don't know where it comes from, that was to pause about that idea about not having sons, it's this idea about passing the family name on to the next generation. Whether that's right or wrong, there is something instinctual, and it's if I'm honest, there's part of me I'm sad about that. And I think I would be really, really hard, kind of on a personal level, if I had a son who didn't want to pass that name on to the next generation. All right? Where that comes from, I don't know. But there's something that's very humbling about it. Something sacred about it. And imagine my last name wasn't Bell, maybe it's Rockefeller or Kennedy, it's a big kind of significant name. And you have a kid who's I don't care. Who cares? He's flippant about it. Right? He has the blessing, the legacy of Abraham. And he says big deal. Give me some soup. That's the difference. We're going to jump forward in the story. There's a little bit of a detour here. Isaac is just like his father Abraham. There's a scene where he tries to pass off Rebekah as his sister. In one way, it doesn't go well for him. Another way, it does go very well for him because he profits pretty good. But I'm going to just pick things up really at the end of chapter 26. And I'm going to read 34 to 35 and then jump into chapter 27, but we read these words. When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And so Esau will later take more wives, and they become more of a area of grief. But this leads to this other section of kind of the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. I'm just going to call it hoodwinking for an inheritance. And it starts at chapter 27. And let me first read up the setup. I can't cover all of it, but I want to highlight some key portions. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called Esau for his older son and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," Esau answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Isaac is one of my favorite characters because he's the typical guy. Everything about Isaac is always related to his stomach. You always know what he's thinking because it's something. In fact, earlier it says the reason why he liked Isaac better, or Esau better than Jacob, was because he's a man of the country and brought back game for him. So here he is. It's okay, I'm about to give my blessing, but I want a good meal out of this if I'm going to do it. So first he's doing it, but he's lost his vision. But I want to just point out a few things. First of all, we already know a number of key clues. we already know that the Abrahamic blessing, this inheritance, is connected to the birthright. We already know that God has already told at least Rebekah that this blessing is going to go to the younger son, Jacob. Jacob has already kind of swindled this deal with Esau to have the blessing and the birthright. But the story begins, regardless of us knowing that, Isaac's plan, and he's the one who's, again, in control of this situation, his plan is still to pass it along to Isaac. So let's pick things up in verse 5. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau, and I love Rebekah. Rebekah's like the coolest mom ever. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father and say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." So every crook needs a partner in crime, and what better partner in crime than a mother? And let's just be honest here, Rebekah really is the mastermind of this operation. She is the brains. Verse 11, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. And I love Rebekah's response. His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go get the goats for me." Right? It's like, let me deal with your father. I'll deal with him. Don't you worry. Just do as I told. Basically, what happens, Jacob goes, he gets the 2 goats. Rebekah prepares them. Rebekah tells Jacob, go get some of your brother's clothes, put it on. He's like, well, what about me? He's a hairy guy. I'm a smooth-skinned guy. She takes some of the goat skin and hair, puts it on her arms, puts it around his neck. And then Jacob goes to his father Isaac, says, here's the food, eat up, now give me your blessing. Now what's curious is you kind of get an idea from Isaac. He hears Jacob speak, he says, that's the voice of Jacob. It doesn't sound like Esau. So he kind of knows something is up. And he sort of wondered, does Isaac really know this is Jacob, or do you not know? It's kind of written in a way that's pretty cool. But he says, well, let me come here, let me smell you. And he smells, the field. He smells like Esau. He says, let me feel you. And he feels kind of the rough hair on his arms and his neck. He's like, okay, you feel like Esau. You don't feel like Jacob. So close enough. And he gives him the blessing. Let me, again, read some of the lines of this blessing. Verse 27, when Isaac caught a smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Notice he doesn't really call him Jacob or Isaac. He just says, my son. And it's because of how he smells. And we're already told Isaac likes the field. And then he says these words, may God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness and an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mothers bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. And again, you hear those echoes right from that original blessing that God gave to Abraham. And as you can expect, just very quickly, as soon as Isaac gives his blessing to Jacob, the next thing we know is Esau arrives back on the scene. He's got his kill. He's prepared the food. And he comes in. He says, okay, here I am. Here's the food. Eat up and now bless me, Dad. And Isaac's like, it's too late. I guess I already took your blessing and I gave it to your younger brother. And Esau literally just falls apart. He melts. He weeps. He begs his dad, please make sure that there's some blessing for me. And kind of the blessing that he gets back from Isaac is pretty sad. Let me just pick it up at verse 38. Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. Then Esau wept aloud. His father Isaac answered him, your dwelling will be far away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. Kind of ouch, right? There's a little glimmer of hope, but it's a pretty ugly blessing. Now, there's a number of events that follow Obviously, because of this, because of Jacob's actions, he is, as you can imagine, Esau is not a happy man, and you already know he's a hunter and a strong man. And so Jacob has to flee for his life. And Rebekah and Isaac say, this is what you need to do. And in fact, what's amazing, though, is after this and before Jacob flees, Isaac blesses Jacob a second time, right? There's no coercion, there's no manipulation, but again, basically finishes off the blessing to Jacob. He says, now I want you to run, I want you to go back, I want you to go back to Haran, the place where we left the family, the place where your cousins are, and marry a nice cousin. I know it's a little bit awkward, but that's what he tells him to do. And Isaac flees away, and then we're also told that Esau marries a couple other women that make his parents not very happy about. But as Jacob flees, I'm going to just end with this last section, and it's sort of one of the most famous scenes in all of the Bible, chapter 28, and this is where I say Jacob goes from deceiver to a divine dreamer. Verse 10 of chapter 28. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Just very cool. We did talk to Jeremy and Josh, who were playing guitar. We thought because of this, we're going to close the service with a little Led Zeppelin, a little Stairway to Heaven, I think, just as inspiration. Okay, maybe not. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All people on the earth will be blessed through and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So again, first of all, God appears to Abraham, then he appears to Isaac, and now he has appeared to Jacob to confirm this covenant, this promise, this blessing. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone, he placed it under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured some oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And that place Bethel means house of God. And all that you've given me, I will give you a tenth. Kind of a lot going on there, but just, again, you see those sort of three themes, right? There's the geography, right? There's that land. Here's this land, promise of land. Here's this family, promise of family. Through your descendants, your nation will be great. And there's this response of worship, right? Creating an altar to the Lord. Here's just a very, very simple, very quick aside. Again, one of those times we listen to these stories and say, man, this happened so long ago. What relevance do they have today? And I kind of mentioned that these shadows kind of cast large shadows even across the pages of history, even to our current day. And this is something that I think is pretty cool. So last year, one of the most significant events that took place globally happened in London, England on May 6th. Probably some of you remember what took place May 6th of last year. So hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people teamed into London, stood out for hours in the rain. People all around the world got up, turned on their television to watch these events. If you were living here in Canada, you got up well before your regular wake-up time to watch what took place May 6th. Does anybody know? Sorry, the coronation of King Charles III. One of the aspects of this coronation that they bring out for every British coronation is just a giant lump of stone. It's called the Stone of Scone or the Stone of Destiny. And what's unique about it is it's one of the national emblems of Scotland, especially for Scottish monarchy. And for over 1,000 years, all of the Scottish kings would use this stone as part of their coronation service over the last couple hundred years with Scotland coming over under the British Commonwealth. It's been kind of brought into the coronation of the British monarch. Well, what's so special about this stone? Well, other than that, we know it goes back a long, long way. It's been used for over 1,000 years, but the initial claim, probably not true, but it's actually believed, or the legend alleges, that this was the stone that Jacob used as his pillow, and that's set up in Bethel, right? So again, here, 4,000 years later, this global event still nods its head to a story that took place 4,000 years ago with the establishment of a promise by God to Jacob. It's pretty wild. So how do we wrap up? What do we do with all this story, with all these events? And the way I kind of wrap it up is just with a simple question. And the question is this: how do we honor the greatest inheritance imaginable? One of the things that happens when, especially even for myself, when I first read these stories for myself, and others when I talk to people over the years about this, they always wrestle with Jacob. We ask the question, what on earth did God see with this guy? Like, how does this guy get his blessing? He's a swindler, he's a manipulator, he's a deceiver. So why does God end up blessing this scoundrel? And in the same part, when you look at Esau, you almost feel sorry for him. You feel sad for him. He got hoodwinked. He was the one manipulated. So why did God like Jacob and not Esau? Like, what is it? Does God condone these sort of deceptive actions of Jacob? And I think the answer simply is no, God does not condone the actions of Jacob. In fact, Jacob has to face serious consequences for his actions, for his swindling, for his deception, for his manipulation. Right? He has to run, he has to flee. He's always looking over his shoulder that Esau's not going to take him out. Eventually he meets his father-in-law, Laban, and the swindler gets swindled, and there's almost a competition of who's the worst swindler between the two of them. So again, what is it about Jacob that differs him from Esau? And the very difference is this: Jacob saw the incredible importance and value of the inheritance of the birthright. And there was nothing that was going to stop him from having God's blessing on his life. Right? Even if it was swindling his brother, even if it was manipulating, whatever it was, he knew that in his family, that promise that was given to his grandfather Abraham, his father Abraham, it was too good to give up, and he was going to do anything to have it in his possession. Right? Contrast that with Esau, who's like, I'll give it up for a pot of stew. What does eternity mean when I'm hungry now? Jacob knew the value, and nothing stopped him from receiving it for himself. And here's the amazing thing, and I think this is such an important question for us. Right? In a moment, we're going to celebrate the Lord's table. But the promise that we have in Christ, those promises have their roots in that same promise God gave to Abraham. We even sang, these ideas about heaven and eternity. When Jesus describes heaven itself, he describes it coming into the presence and sitting at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In fact, in one place he uses a parable and calls heaven Abraham's side or Abraham's bosom, right, at Abraham's table. Right? It's this idea that we have access, we can have family access to this inheritance God first gave to Abraham for us. It's pretty wild. It's amazing. It's the greatest gift, it's the greatest inheritance imaginable. But unlike Jacob, we don't have to deceive, we don't have to manipulate to receive it. We just have to believe it and accept it. It is the greatest gift imaginable. And it's funny, over the years, I've met lots of people who have Esau mindsets and people with Jacob mindsets. I've known a lot of people who've been part of a church, grown up in the church, some people who've never been part of the church. Talked to many people over the years, and you know what, that whole religious thing, it's not for me. You know, I'm not saying I don't believe it. In fact, I think it might be true, but really that's just not something I'm interested in. I'm just going to take my chances. And, you know, I'd rather have the pot of stew. I'd rather just kind of live for this life, for this world, and not worry about any of that other stuff. Right? And they give it up. That's kind of like an Esau mindset. There's a lot of other people, again, who've been part of church. I know lots and lots of people say, you know what, even here today, I'm not 100% if I believe this, but even if there's just a fraction that it could be true, this is so good, I want to be a part of it. I will give my life for it because I know giving up, I would be the dumbest person alive. Right? One is a Esau mindset, the other is a Jacob mindset. And when we come here, one of the things that we do, just even as we're going to celebrate the Lord's table, is coming at it with a Jacob mindset. This is access through Jesus Christ to the greatest gift, the greatest inheritance, eternal life. And all we have to do is believe and accept it. And our prayer is that anybody who's part of Trentside or in our community is that we can give them the Jacob mindset, that this is the greatest gift, the greatest thing, the greatest inheritance imaginable.